Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined by my partner in crime, Wes Hodkiewicz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. And Wes, have you caught your breath yet? 30-28, the Packers pull out a last-second victory in San Francisco. With this one, we might as well start with the finish. 37 seconds on the clock, no timeouts, ball on the 25. Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams, Mason Crosby, and some really good pass protection get the job done for the Packers.
Moments of greatness reveal themselves, in those clutch moments, and it's incredible going back and looking at some of the transcripts, from Kyle Shanahan in the locker room for the 49ers. 37 seconds left. They knew there was too much time left on the clock. Now, that's not to say the Green Bay Packers were just going to go down and at their own will put points up against them. But that's way too much time to give Aaron Rodgers to make something happen. And
even with no timeouts.
Yeah. And as Rodgers said, and he so eloquently put afterwards, he knew he needed two chunk plays to be able to get downfield. They needed to get within the 37-yard line there, basically to give Mason Crosby a chance at this thing. And what are you going to do? You're going to look towards Davante Adams. And, Adams pretty much imposed his will on San Francisco in the first half. A lot of injuries in their secondary, pretty banged up. They were having a hard time trying to defend against him. They eventually shifted to the cover 2 look, giving him a little bit more attention in the second half. But on that final series, they were content to try to find ways to play a semi-prevent defense. They still rushed 4, but they put guys back, and Aaron Rodgers went to work, man. That first play, as he talked about later on, something that they kind of even drew up in the dirt at practice on Thursday.
Right.
For Adams to come across and Rodgers to put that ball where he did, just over the outstretched arms of Fred Warner.
Sure.
One of the best in the business at inside linebacker right now. To get those 25 yards right off the bat, once they got to midfield, I think everybody felt pretty good about their chances to be able to at least give Mason Crosby a chance to hit the game winner.
Yeah, once the ball was on the 50, as Rodgers said, he knew going into it, 2 chunk plays is what you need. He got the first one, the ball's at midfield. At that point, Crosby said afterward his range was, 54 to 56 yards. Maybe you could push it a little further if you absolutely had to. One more completion, one more chunk of yardage there got that kick to 51, and that's certainly well within Crosby's range. I thought it was interesting that Adams right after the game said that in some ways the fact that there were no timeouts might have worked to the Packers' advantage, because with no timeouts the 49ers were guarding the boundaries. They were leaving the middle of the field open, thinking that a couple of completions in the middle of the field and the time it would take to go up and spike the ball, that maybe the Packers wouldn't quite have enough. And it turns out they did. They had 3 seconds to spare, even with the one incomplete pass in between. The 2 completions, the 2 spikes, 3 seconds to spare. And the Packers get out of San Francisco with an incredibly uplifting victory. These two teams, long ways to go in this season, obviously, but these, I think, are 2 teams we're going to be talking about come December when we're, looking at playoff picture and whatnot.
Very much so, because the weapons now for San Francisco are more than just their running backs. Deebo Samuel, he's going to be a problem here for the NFL. I thought George Kittle, when he's healthy, it's him and Travis Kelce as far as 1A, 1B for the best at that position. But what struck me the most about that final drive was the psychology of it. And Rodgers explaining, you can't be looking for checkdowns there. That's bad. But they also, the way they bracketed the sidelines, 49ers were basically protecting against allowing any pass in the middle of the field to get to the sidelines. So what does Green Bay do? Davante Adams goes down the first time, gets the 17 yards, gets down again, playing with a backup left tackle and all these moving pieces. They managed to set their formation, spike the ball, and Mason Crosby, for the 9th time in his career now, goes out there and drills home a game winner. It got a little close for comfort in terms of the pass rush or the attempted block there by San Francisco.
But, yeah, that was awfully close.
But be that as it may, horseshoes and hand grenades, the Green Bay Packers came out. They found a way to win this thing. They had the weight of the world on them in the fourth quarter. So many different circumstances, some questionable officiating, different variables. But more than anything, San Francisco showed a never-say-die attitude, and they came back to put themselves in that ball game. But ultimately, Mike, I said it in Insider Inbox. You and I have talked about it this week. The Green Bay Packers were the better football team, and Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams were the 2 best players on the field. That's what showed in crunch time.
Yeah, absolutely. The Packers were the better team on the field in this game for the vast majority of it. I mean, the fact that the 49ers never had the lead in the game until there were 37 seconds left on the clock, that says a lot with the Packers playing on the road. We had talked about it last week, how important it was. Rodgers had talked about it after the Detroit game, LaFleur as well, how important it was to get off to a fast start. The Packers were able to do that, getting out to a 17-0 lead in the second quarter. The defense was playing really well. The offense was moving the ball. The 17-0 could have been even better, obviously. The Packers had a failed 4th and 1 in the red zone there that left points out there. But they got off to the start that they needed to. And for the most part, really up until that final drive by San Francisco, the Packers prevented the San Francisco momentum shifts because they were there. There were the shifts, but they prevented them from becoming that tsunami where the other team just completely takes over and suddenly you're totally on your heels and you can't figure out how to stem the tide. That never really happened. San Francisco, give them credit. They put together, Garoppolo puts together the drive. The big play to Kittle was really the backbreaker for the Packer defense there. And San Francisco gets into the end zone, but Aaron Rodgers had just enough time to go the other way.
In Rodgers and Adams, I've already discussed them, just how talented they are, and to be able to have that connection, being able to find a way to win that football game, all the credit to them in the world.
Well, we saw the back shoulder throws early, and then you see the balls over the middle late in the game. I mean, when Aaron Rodgers needs it, there's no secret, who's going to get the football.
But I'm going to mention this because he'll be the last person to bring it up. But I mean, the game plan that Matt LaFleur and his coaches put together and the way they coached that football team, I thought really shined through in this game. First and foremost, you look at, you have Josh Nijman making a spot start at left tackle. I went back and did the math, Mike. 1,044 days since the last time that young man started in a meaningful regular season game. You have to go back to, his time at Virginia Tech. And here he is protecting the blind side of the NFL's reigning league MVP. Nijman did an exemplary job in that game. But it's also Matt LaFleur and his coaching staff being really smart with their game plan, right? They understood you can't put everything on this kid against Nick Bosa. There were times where it needed to be that, but Mercedes Lewis, best blocking tight end in the National Football League, taking on Bosa, sometimes even one-on-one. Robert Tonyan had that chip block that made all the raves on social media on Monday where he was able to get the pancake of Bosa down. That young offensive line gives up 1 sack in this game, and Rodgers gets the ball out quickly. It was your quintessential team victory in the way they went about this thing, and the fact that they were able to establish the momentum that they had despite the fact they were without their top 2 offensive linemen.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at, and I've mentioned this in a couple different places on our website, you look at that starting offensive line on Sunday night. The 2 rookies at center and right guard. You had John Runyon at left guard, as you just mentioned, Josh Nijman at left tackle. Those 4 guys, 4/5 of your offensive line, collectively had 5 NFL starts to their name heading into that game on Sunday night. Now they have 9. They almost doubled it. They went from 5 to 9 because they all added another start. But obviously, Nijman, it was his first. For Runyon, it was his second. For the 2 rookies, it was their third, having, with this being week 3 and them being starters in the opener this year. That was pretty remarkable to me, how that group held up throughout the course of 4 quarters the way that it did. But you also mentioned the game plan. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, that we haven't seen the Packers do this, but the vast majority of the time on 3rd down, it was shotgun, empty backfield, spread them out. And you may say, well, aren't you leaving, isn't that leaving the offensive line vulnerable? No, that was a plan on 3rd down to get the ball out of Rodgers' hands. He was going to have as many targets as possible. He was going to scan the field before the snap, and he was going to know where he was going to not leave him vulnerable to that 3rd down pass rush of a Nick Bosa or an Eric Armstead or a D Ford or a blitzing Fred Warner, whatever the case might be. That was the plan. I can probably count on 3 fingers or less the number of times on 3rd down that the Packers did not empty the backfield and go shotgun. The plan was clear about getting the ball out of Rodgers' hands in those potential pass rush situations, and for the most part, the way the Packers were moving the ball, it was hard to argue with the results.
Yeah, and exactly, and being able also early on, I felt like getting off to a fast start. We'll talk about the defense here momentarily, but to get off to the fast start that they did, getting out of the gate, Rodgers talked about it afterwards. He's been so reiterating how much he wanted them to get off, the energy to come out the right way. They did that in this game. And, they haven't broken a 70-yard run yet this season. But A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones combining for 25 carries for 100 yards. Just really clean, consistent production. And being able to do it against that front, I think that allowed those offensive linemen to get comfortable. I thought you really saw Josh Myers' athleticism in this game and his ability to get to the second level. I think, as I've continued to say on this broadcast, Billy Turner is one of the most underrated players on this team. And the fact is, he's been a really stable presence at right tackle since they put him there last season.
Yeah, we sure didn't hear much from Dee Ford on Sunday night, and that was Turner's assignment. And yes, there were some chips on that side as well, but obviously the chipping was mostly focused at left tackle with Nyman, and Turner was a country not heard from, and that worked out perfectly.
And that's exactly what you're looking for when you decide we're going to take this one spot that's vacant and we're going to put a young player in there that's never started an NFL game. You don't want to have to worry about the right side there, and I thought Turner held up his end of the bargain. But I'll just close on this in regards to the offense. For Davante Adams, with all the attention he's received, to have 25 catches, the most catches in franchise history through the first 3 games of the season, to have 300 receiving yards already, have come back from a nasty, nasty, vicious hit from Jimmy Ward that should have been a helmet-to-helmet, to do all that and get back on the field and come up with 2 huge catches for 42 yards in the clutch. Davante Adams, as we continue to see, Mike, it's so fun when you can watch a guy ascend to a certain level, but watching him now sustain and elevate from that level, an all-pro level, has been a really treat. Been a really big treat.
Yeah, no question about it. Absolutely no question about it. Some shout-outs to our sponsors here, Wes. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs. We believe in better.
We got a new guy on the Cousins train, too. Did you see that? Our social media coordinator over here, Stephen Huddy.
That's right.
Huddy,
yes.
Whatever he pronounces his last name.
Yeah, Stephen is, he's becoming a big Cousins sub.
He tweeted me a nice little photo. Maybe that's what the thing should be. Like, hey, if you tweet your cousin's food at me, I'll give you a shout-out on Unscripted.
Yeah.
Don't give anyone any ideas.
Well, on the defensive side of the ball in this game for the Packers, It was a strong start, an incredibly athletic interception by Jair Alexander on the deep ball to George Kittle. Unfortunately, the Packers did not turn that turnover into points. And really, Wes, the unfortunate thing with the way the defense was playing was that long kickoff return was allowed right before halftime, because then the 49ers only had about 30 yards to go. They were able to get in the end zone. And still probably shouldn't have because I think I agree with Matt LaFleur. I think it was intentional grounding on Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he was going to throw an interception in the end zone if he actually tried to throw it, and so he spiked the ball into the ground. That aside, the Packers were on their way to a first-half shutout, which would have actually been a 4-quarter shutout going back to the second half of the Monday night game against the Lions. And this is a defense that obviously knows Zadarius Smith, lost Chris Barnes to a concussion in the game along the way. Kevin King, they find out he's ill and is out for the game on game day. And I thought the defense, I know the final drive was frustrating to a lot of fans. I get it, but that's also the way this thing can work in the NFL. I thought this Packer defense, in my eyes, took a big step forward from where it was the first 2 weeks of the season.
It did, and especially from the standpoint of it needed to start fast. I think that was the thing I talked about. They needed to set the tempo. They needed to stop the run. In San Francisco, a team that ran all over them 2 years ago, could not run the football against them in this game. That
and
was
frankly kind of gave up on it, even though they were never out of the Packers were leading the whole time, but they were never. It was never a completely abandon the run situation for an offense. Yet San Francisco just never wanted to commit to it at all.
So you look at the scoreboard. Then I understand that that's the ultimate indicator of where things are at. But that's the reason why Green Bay was able to start pinning its ears back. Gets 4 sacks in this game after really struggling to get pressure the first few weeks. I thought Preston Smith had his best game of the season, looked like a stud throughout, a lot of pressure. Kenny Clark was a man possessed and made one of the biggest plays in the game by forcing what ended up being. I mean, the game turned really into trying to judge what Jimmy Garoppolo's passes were doing. And it was funny to hear Garoppolo talk after the game about, that was kind of on the refs with my pass with the fumble. Unless, and maybe someone can explain it to me, but I grew up underneath the understanding that if it's a pass that goes backwards, no matter if it goes in directly or if it goes inside, it's a fumble.
Yeah, the only time it's not is if it comes out of his hand forward and the defense bats it backwards, then it's a forward pass. Quite frankly, Wes, I think Garoppolo on the play that he fumbled in the fourth quarter, I think he was trying to do the same thing that he did at the end of the first half. He was trying to basically just spike the ball and get rid of it to avoid the sack. Well, that time it cost him because his shoulder got turned, the ball went backwards, and it was alive, and Devondre Campbell recovered it for Green Bay.
It was funny, too, when you mentioned the intentional grounding, and I don't disagree. I even tweeted during the game, that's intentional grounding. But out of all the, in my own eye, botched calls throughout that game, that was the one I at least understood the rationale for it because the referee said, well, he was trying to throw it to Kittle. Fine. I can understand that. And I don't want to get into the call stuff, but between the catch that Sanu had, between the defensive pass interference on Eric Stokes, between the hit on Devontae, there was so much about that game that was obtuse that it goes without saying. But that being said, the Packers defensively, the reason they won this game is because of how they played in the first half and how they were able to keep San Francisco off the board, allow themselves to get off to a fast start. Yes, there was production late. Yes, there were some injuries there. They lose Chris Barnes. They had to adjust to that. But all that being said, I was really impressed by how this defense has really picked itself up after a rough first 6 quarters. No one's debating that. No one's denying that.
Yep.
But been able to show more of what it's supposed to look like, despite the fact they don't have, Zadarius Smith right now. So I thought that was a major step forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite frankly, the final drive, yes, the defense needs to rise up and get a stop there with the score 27-21. Unfortunately, it was a mistake by the third safety in the dime, Henry Black, that led to the ruptured play with George Kittle. 39 yards on that play. Well, that's more than half of the 75 yards they had to defend, and that's the one thing you can't do in those late game. Whether it's 4-minute, 2-minute situations, is you can't give up those huge chunks of yardage. You have to give yourself the opportunities down the field at the 35, at the 45, at the minus 45, at the minus 40 to potentially get those stops and keep the other team out of scoring range. The 39-yard play to Kittle, suddenly the 49ers went from needing 75 yards to get a touchdown to being in complete command with plenty of time on the clock and everything that they wanted to do. So that's the one thing. And the Packers, the way the last game and a half had been going, they were not giving up explosive plays. They just gave one up at a bad time.
Yeah, totally. And that's also the rich thing. It's kind of what I find quizzical. Because fans will always say, well, why do they do this in 2 minutes? Well, sometimes the way they play their 2-minute defense is because they don't want to give up the big ruptured play that not only allows a lot of production, but doesn't drain any time off the clock. That's ultimately the game you're sort of playing there a little bit.
Yep.
But, overall, to have as many moving pieces as they've had, Jair Alexander, as you said, as incredible of an interception as you're going to find. A guy going from the boundary position coming across the field.
There is absolutely no way Jimmy Garoppolo thought that pass would be in danger of getting picked off. He threw that deep down the middle to Kittle, thinking either my great tight end is gonna make this play, or it's just gonna be an incomplete deep ball. And Alexander comes swooping over and gets that interception and gets a 20-25 yard return out of it to boot. So just a tremendous play by Jair.
But point being with that is Alexander's interception, the 4 sacks, the fact that Devondre Campbell got yet another takeaway this week, which was a fantastic development from the inside backer position. The Packers are making plays defensively, and that was the main thing in that first game against New Orleans. They just couldn't generate positive plays for themselves. And I just feel like, yes, there's going to be times where defenses or offenses get yardage, but the way you can always neutralize that is by making plays defensively. And I think you're seeing the studs, the athleticism in this secondary, and especially up front, starting to reveal itself a little bit. So I'm excited to see where they go this week now, going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, for sure. Well, last thing before we go, we'll just take a look at where things stand in the NFC North. After 3 games, the Packers are all alone in first place at 2-1. The Chicago Bears and Minnesota Vikings both 1-2, having gotten there in very different fashions. The Bears now they don't know who their quarterback is going to be because of the injury situation. They might end up going to Nick Foles here in Week 4. The Vikings get a big win over the Seattle Seahawks, and as we talked about with the Vikings' first 2 games, they were so close to winning both of those. The Minnesota Vikings are like, fractions of inches from being a 3-0 team here. They are 1-2 with an impressive win in the books, and the Detroit Lions 0-3, losing in a way that just has to be tremendous gut punch to Dan Campbell in trying to get his first win as an NFL head coach, allowing the 4th and 19, the missed delay of game, the 66-yard record field goal that bounces off the crossbar. Detroit 0-3, but an 0-3 that's been a pretty darn competitive one.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Mike, with those AFC crossover games. Those are the times you have to see the AFC come through for you. So if you're the Packers, it sucks watching Detroit, which I think they're doing things the right way. I think Dan Campbell is the right voice for them right now. But, the Packers have to be happy to see them come up with an L there. It was incredible watching it develop. I was watching the actual play as in real time. And my boss, Duke Bobber, who had the video or the game, whatever you call that, game station, whatever ESPN has, where it has like the stat box score thing going on.
Oh, okay.
But they have the percentages on there for what the outcome is, the win probability. And to see it go from Detroit Lions 99.9% to Baltimore Ravens 100% in just a quick, real-time refresh was jarring. And then to hit that field goal, I wrote this in inbox, Mike, pound for pound, I'll debate people if they want to talk about it, but Justin Tucker is the greatest pound-for-pound kicker that I think we've ever seen in this league in terms of the pedigree coming into the league, his power, his accuracy, and the fact that he does come up in those clutch moments. The Baltimore Ravens know what they have in Tucker. It's the reason he is the highest-paid kicker in the league. But for him to come in there, 66 yards, that thing shouldn't have been close to the crossbar, let alone hitting it and bouncing over, and to see the Detroit fans behind it just in disbelief.
Well, it was amazing. I think you were doing pregame radio at the time. I was watching in the little conference room where we watched the game against San Francisco Sunday night. I was watching the NBC pregame show, and when they showed that highlight of Tucker's long kick, Drew Brees pointed out, zeroing in on Tucker, how he actually did like a little crow hop, like a baseball outfielder does, in trying to throw out a guy at home plate kind of thing. He did a little crow hop with his footwork to get that much more into that kick. And the fact that a guy can do that, and the thing is dead on accurate. I mean, he hit the crossbar at 66 yards, but right in the middle of the crossbar. I mean, he was straight down the middle with that kick, even adjusting his footwork and everything to try to get a little bit more energy into it.
It looked like an aimed kickoff. Is what it looked like.
Yeah, the guy is a phenomenal kicker. Had the 61-yarder in that same stadium, Ford Field, to help out the Packers in 2013 when the Lions were looking like they were going to win the NFC North that year, and now he hits a 66-yarder at Ford Field. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, a pretty special moment. But yeah, for the Green Bay Packers, 2-1. It's a good place to be right now in a division where there's a lot of teams working through some early season adversity right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Packers are back at home in Week 4 against Pittsburgh, which we will talk about on our next show. For that, we're calling it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team all week long on Packers.com. For Wes, I'm Mike. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. See you next time.